Hi, you're watching a very special recording of Agenda AWANI. I'm still here, accredited media, together with producer Shafizan Johari and cameraman Rizal to represent Astro AWANI right here at the Media Village of World Comic Forum 2017 in Davos. And it is here, even though the perception in our country and maybe the rest of Asia, Davos is about the elites of the elites, the powerful businessmen, all these forces that we don't even know and understand. But more and more, this is beginning to sound like the fights we have, or the struggle and the causes that we have in Asia. And they talk about access to water. They talk about making sure the poorest of farmers get their inclusive wealth. But it gives me an opportunity not to meet the top CEOs, but to meet better than top CEOs, because they're fighting causes that really matters on ground in our parts of the world and affecting thousands and millions of people. And with that, I would like to introduce my new friend, Nina. Nina is from Goodweave. I've let her make, because I was trying to find a nice way to introduce Goodweave, but I guess it has to come from somebody who has been on ground, been through it all to say it. So Nina, please fire away.
Yes, well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really pleased to be talking to you and the audience in Malaysia. So my name is Nina Smith. I'm the CEO of Goodweave International, and we work to combat child labor and other forms of what we call modern slavery and manufacturing supply chains. We work in India, Nepal, and Afghanistan, where we partner with major companies. For example, in the U.S., Target is a major retail brand, and we partner with them to ensure that the textile products they're sourcing in India are free from child labor. The way we do that is they require our suppliers, their suppliers of goods, to undergo regular random unannounced inspections. These supply chains are very complex, and so we map them and investigate them and deter child labor. We also, when we find victims of this, what I would say is a crime, we rescue them and provide them rehabilitation. And we also invest in worker community programs to ensure every child living in the area of these production sites are enrolled in school, and that workers are protected from exploitation.
For those maybe who are not so well versed with the issue, how serious is the issue of child labor, especially in the textile and maybe the supply chain of the big garment industry?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. So today, all around the world, there are 168 million children working in the global economy. That the International Labor Organization collects and shares that data. And about half of that is, half of the problem is in the Asia region, actually, and India, there's a major problem. And India is a major producer of textile products, carpets and home textiles, apparel, and when big brands go to source those products, they will meet their suppliers in a fancy showroom or in a nice factory, but in fact, many of those products aren't ultimately made in that place. The supplier will outsource to many tiers, often to remote villages. So that's a bit about what the problem looks like. And children as young as 6 or 8 years old could be involved in manufacturing a t-shirt or a pillow cover that you and I are buying in department stores and online sites.
Many times when we mention issues like this, people will be looking at the authorities to do something. Mm-hmm. It's their responsibility, the government, the police, the trade commission, and all these things. But I think this is the days and age of the 21st century where we don't wait for the powers that be to act, because we the people, we buy this product, and better for you, you went into the organization, and one of the ways to look at it is, let's take the power that we can do and do it straight away. But maybe I'm just paraphrasing, maybe it's different for you, or how is it?
No, I mean, I think that's exactly right. I think that my view is that as a consumer, I want to know, I want to have real visibility into where the product I made was made, and ensure that I'm not participating in an exploitative system. that might put a child to work and keep them out of school, and worse than that, keep the cycle of poverty going. So I think there are all kinds of ways to make a difference, and I think consumer power and the power of business change is really very strong.
What kind of impact are we looking at here? Because I first met you because I entered into the press conference about social entrepreneurship and escalating them to the highest level of impact. And you're one of the chosen select by WEF to talk about impact in social entrepreneurship. So if you can give us the numbers.
Yeah, well, we first started working in the handmade carpet industry, where at the time, around 1995, there were about 1 million children toiling in those supply chains. And one thing about child labor is it's often hidden away. So what we do is a few different things. One is to take the problem out of hiding, to make consumers aware and companies aware, and literally reach into those supply chains. But the big impact comes when we get more and more businesses partnering with us in our program. Not only are we reducing child labor, so we've reduced the problem now by about 80% after less than 20 years. And more importantly, we're changing business practices where the more companies that partner with us, we're literally transforming the entire industry. So we're sort of stamping out the problem forever in this industry by working with a critical mass of players in the sector. So, and I did mention this 168 million
Yes.
number. So one of our objectives right now is we're launching a new program called Sourcing Freedom. And the idea here is to take this proven set of tools we've developed in the carpet industry that's worked, and that's business friendly and community friendly, and pilot it in 5 new sectors. And so, you know, the objective there is to not initially maybe chip away at this 168 million number, but ultimately give, you know, a viable, scalable set of tools for businesses so that ultimately we can use that to stop the problem forever.
Maybe the first hurdle is in the mindset thing. A lot of people, when we mention social entrepreneurship or activism or NGOs, it's like a small group of people sitting somewhere fighting against the odds, trying to do good. But I think the new way to look at this is, hey, it doesn't matter whether on the other side it's a big business or anything. They might be Fortune 500 companies or billion. If it needs to partner with them, should it go to that, then that's the way to go.
Yeah.
And then if you go down the ground, you find some other ways to do it. And who's to say that this kind of movement cannot, you know, replace the old supply chain, give it a new supply chain?
Right.
Is that the way really to do justice for what good?
Yeah, I think so. I think, first of all, you know, it's not, in the case of business, let's say, it's not always easy for a big brand to jump into a new social initiative. So I think there's a pathway to along the lines of what you said. So, you know, when we first started, it wasn't easy to get companies to work with us. We worked with very small, high-end luxury brands that maybe were mission-driven at that time, because we needed to really prove out our theory of how we might be able to go about doing this. So that's kind of a first phase. But then when you have a proof of concept and you can really start to grow, that's a time when I think you can get some bigger businesses to partner and really scale up what's possible.
We are here still in Davos, me and my new friend Nina. Of course, the freezing cameraman Rizal is back there, and also the producer, A.K. Shafizan Johari. But the issue here, the perception dominating the view about Davos back home is an elitist meet. But more and more, like I said in my intro, there's more voices now in Davos. Whether or not it's the real thing or not, but to me that doesn't matter, because like many other journalists here, we just go and get the things that we want to get. And I want to talk more about social entrepreneurship because Goodweave, where Nina is the CEO, has been selected even by WEF themselves as the proof that social enterprises and social entrepreneurs is not just the alternative to the mainstream business in the world. They can make great social solutions and make good business sense at the same time. Is this the case, or am I just, leading the line without real proof?
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. In some cases, social entrepreneurs are running for-profit businesses, and some of them are very profitable, in fact. And in the case of Goodweave, we're a nonprofit organization, so we don't have a profit-making goal. We do generate some of our income, about 20% of our income, from fees that companies pay to participate in our program. So to some degree it's self-funding. I think what's more important is that the companies who work with us, who are committed to ensuring they have ethical supply chains and who want to use, in fact, Goodweave issues a label with a special logo that consumers can look for and know products are child labor free. So I think what's interesting is that we see an emerging business case around this kind of work. So companies that participate in our program have evidence that they gain customer loyalty, that they can reduce returns of products, in fact, because the consumers feel they're not just buying a product, but they're buying into helping solve a social problem. These days, in the corporate sector, there's a lot of concern about supply chain risk, and that kind of risk comes from being exposed for having labor rights abuses in manufacturing. And so many companies now see the work of organizations like us as really a very important business need to mitigate that kind of a corporate risk.
Just one thinking that if you're a social entrepreneur and social enterprise, you'll be fighting against the other side, which is the already established business, because if you do this, then you're taking away their price competitiveness, because the perception is if you take away all this, then the cost will go higher. And at the end of the day, the business will not want to absorb the cost. The cost will be passed down the line, right down to the consumers. What would you say to that?
Well, I mean, we've already proven, we have 140 brands around the world that are working with us that are evidence that not only is this not bad for business, but in fact, there's like I said, an emerging business case. So I think one thing I want to be clear about is that not all businesses are embracing this, for sure. And so I think we're at an important time, because there are major companies that can come out now and talk about the benefits and talk about the fact that this works. But I would say still the main reaction I see is, to some degree, A, it's too expensive, and B, it's too complicated what you do. You know, we want it to be cheap and easy. So I'm not saying that that's a correct assumption. I'm just saying that is often the point of view from the business community. So I feel like one of the really important things we're doing is not just for our issue, but beyond that, showing how tackling social and environmental problems by companies is something that's good for business. So there's a sort of bigger agenda at play here, and I think we are at a step change moment where we're going to see more and more of this.
It's a new framework for the world, definitely, but at the end of the day, it goes back to each individual, and we wouldn't be doing justice to social enterprises and social entrepreneurs and movements like that, because if we only talk about it from the macroeconomic perspective, it's taking away the real verve about social enterprise, which is about the human side. And I'm sure you yourself and maybe your team has come across the sad, tragic human story of a child being subjected to slave labor at that young age. So maybe if you can share with us the stories and the narrative, it will keep this conversation alive, in the sense that this is not just about Davos or about Goodweave, but this is about just being a good human helping another fellow human being.
I think that's an excellent point, and I mean, I'd like to share two stories, actually, if I might. The first story is the story that got me into this work. So it was around 1996, a little bit later. I read an article in a popular magazine in the United States called Vanity Fair. You may have heard of it. There was an expose about a Pakistani boy named Iqbal Masih, and Iqbal had been a boy caught up in making carpets in Pakistan. He was referred to as a carpet slave, and he was literally working as a slave as a very young boy. He began working at the age of, I think, 9 years old, and he escaped at the age of 11, actually, and became an activist in Pakistan. It was controversial, but he was a very special boy. He had a skill for communication, and people could relate to him, and ultimately he was brought to the United States. He won the Reebok Human Rights Award, which was a very high-profile award at that time, and he traveled around and in particular spent time talking to school children and really making them motivated by his story to help children living in this and you know, toiling in this kinds of situation. And when he went back to Pakistan, he was murdered. And most people believe he was murdered for his activism and potentially even hired by the industry. That whoever murdered him was sort of hired by the industry. It was a horrible story, and he's sort of a martyr for the cause. And I read that, and at the very end of the article, it talked about our founder, who was just starting our organization, Kailash Satyarthi, who just won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2014 for his work on these issues. And Iqbal's story motivated me. When I read that, I said, that's what I want to do, that's what I want to work on. And so, but he's motivated so many people to work on these issues. In fact, there's a whole network of American schools called Operation Day's Work, and every year they, because of their original contact with Iqbal, they created an entire program dedicated to raising money for children and children's education all over the world.
I'm still here at World Economic Forum Davos, and I'm pausing because it's so cool, and I'm forcing my good new friend Nina to be in the call with me. The media village is just there. The Congress, where most of the activities of World Economic Forum is just behind, but in between the trees, I'm going to allow you to tell your second story. And we here have been talking about great initiatives of the world, and Nina has been selected to represent Goodweave, which wants to stop child labor. 80% have been stopped around the areas that you guys have been working.
Yeah.
So I'm asking her to relate to us narrative, because in our parts of the world we like to hear stories. So I know the story is tragic and touching, but maybe we need to hear this so that we'll be inspired to keep the fight.
Well, this story has a better outcome, because this story is about a girl named Sanju who grew up in the Himalayan foothills in Nepal, and I believe she was one of 7 children. And one day her family was basically living a subsistence life in that community, growing food and making small bamboo crafts to sell. And one day what we would call a labor trafficker came and offered money to her parents to take her, and they said they were going to bring her and give her an education in Kathmandu, in the big city, and also give her job skills training. But what happened to Sanju was that person was what we would call a trafficker, a human trafficker, and took her and brought her to a carpet factory, got money himself, and then Sanju was trapped, literally living inside this factory day and night. She was 11 years old. She was kept away from her family, and one day her life changed, and that's because this small production unit for carpets was one that was part of the Good Weave supply chain. So one of our inspectors in Nepal, whose name is Drona and who's been working for us for nearly 20 years, found her when he went on one of his random unannounced inspections and rescued her actually and took her to a transit home that we have in Kathmandu, and where she received intensive counseling and education. We have a special education program for children who've been left out to help mainstream them. And anyway, Sanju's story is a happy one in that now actually she's doing great in a really excellent private school in Kathmandu. We still support her education, and we made a 3-minute film about Sanju and a whole campaign. So if anyone's interested at www.goodweave.org, they can find the video with Sanju's story, and it's a beautiful one.
We're going to take an excerpt of that, and I'm going to ask permission now for when this goes on there. We're going to put it as part of this story. But before I end, a lot has been said about World Economic Forum. Mixed views, certain places, some are for, some are against, some they don't really know what to say about it.
Yeah.
But I want to take your input into this, because you go to sessions and you participated in panels and stuff. So what would your view be?
Well, from my experience, there are a lot of big political speeches happening here, and I don't necessarily agree with the politics and the statements that are being made. I think what's important is there is a lot of collaboration happening here at the World Economic Forum, and I'll give you an example that right before our interview I came from a very important small session on the issue of modern slavery, and Theresa May, the Prime Minister of the UK, was the main speaker there, and there were a few others too. And what's great is she had, as Home Minister, passed some very important legislation, the UK Modern Slavery Act, and she was in the room with NGOs and business leaders and donors talking about the importance of realizing this law and really mobilizing the UK government and other governments around the world to partner with NGOs and businesses to stop this crime. So I think those are examples of things that are very positive and I believe will result in real concrete action.
What we know for sure, both you and me, having been here, is that there's always room for discourse, to argue whatever cause you want to argue, and the elites are here.
Yeah.
So it's up to you how you want to pitch it.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah.
So in that light, I want to link it to maybe a bit of the sideline, but by the end of World Economic Forum Davos 2017, it will be the Friday that the swearing in of the new president of America will take place. And you're an American, you're still living in America and working from there. How do you think that will color what you do? Because a lot of people are looking at President Trump and from what was being said before during campaigning and up until now, and they think that it's very, very different from where they're standing, from what they've been hearing from the United States before. So I'm going to put it to you to quantify it from your point of view, from what you do.
For what I do, I would just say I am definitely very concerned as an American right now, and you know, there's a lot of uncertainty. In terms of our issue, the one thing I would have to say is I believe that probably doing anything to, let's say, diminish the funding out of the government or those kinds of things would probably be pretty low on his list. So we are going to, there's bipartisan support for the work, not the work that we do, but in general there are several US government agencies that are really dedicated to funding research and ground level programs to stop child labor, to stop forced labor. And I think that those will continue to go forward, and a lot of my colleagues will be rallying around to make sure that that's the case. But I would say there's a lot of uncertainty.
Thank you so much. I'll be looking carefully and closer at my labels, and I'll be Googling the whole mechanism of Good Weave to understand better.
Great.
You have been watching a very specially recorded session of Agenda AWANI. This is my new friend Nina from Good Weave. Do Google her and her outfit because they're doing very, very important initiative there's the number of 168 million children, you know. Imagine looking down at your little brother or little sister or your own son and daughters, and they don't have the right. And in fact, not only though they do not have the right, they are forced to work at that young age. So that's all I have for today. And I would like to represent producer A.K. Shafizan Johari and cameraman Rizal to bid you goodbye right here from Davos, and we'll give you another episode very, very soon, because World Comic Forum has accredited Astro AWANI, and we're here reporting just for you for Agenda AWANI. Good night and goodbye.